started using Tinder for the first time a few months ago, and here is my first and last experience of meeting someone from an online site. I'm 24, and I'm pretty average. I'm not the most attractive, nor am I super fit. I'm also a bit of a nerd. The only thing I really have going for me is that I make enough money to take care of myself and a future partner, so I can pay all the bills alone. I have had a serious relationship, and at my age, I am single. I still find it embarrassing. There is a lot of pressure from my friends and family, telling me that I need to get out more and live my life. Sorry for the information overload, but I'm also still a virgin. My friends practically crucify me for that. That's why every time we go out, they say it as a joke, but I've never understood why they care so much. I matched with a girl named Isabella, and we talked for weeks on the phone and Snapchat before meeting in person. I eventually asked her if she would like to go out, and although she seemed hesitant at first, she eventually said yes. That night, she sent me the address, and I got there just before 9. I admit I was a little nervous before the meetup. It was my first time meeting a girl from Tinder, and I was just hoping everything would go well. I picked her up and we went to dinner. I paid the bill. At first, it was really awkward, but then when we started getting to know each other more, and with a couple of drinks, we both started to relax and have fun. I asked her if she wanted to do anything else that night, and although she seemed interested, she told me she had a long day and had to get up early the next day. She told me she wanted me to go out again in a few days, and she suggested we do it at my place. She also suggested we have some drinks, she would make dinner, and we could watch some movies. That sounded perfect to me, so I dropped her off at her house that night. About a couple of days later, she came over to mine. We both had the next day off from work, so it seemed like it would be perfect for us. This time, she insisted on driving herself instead of me picking her up. She got there around 7, and shortly after, we started making dinner. We also started drinking pretty early. At first, I had a few beers, but she seemed to be getting a lot more drunk than me, so she wanted me to drink her liquor. I drank a few drinks of what she had, and within the next 10 minutes, I started to feel really sick. It was such a sudden feeling, since normally I am pretty resistant to alcohol. I started to feel really dizzy and weird, and after a few minutes, I couldn't even hold a basic conversation. The last thing I remember was Isabella laughing at me for some reason, and then I passed out and fell asleep for like 4 hours. I woke up on the couch with a terrible headache and heavy breathing. I was disoriented and got up to look for Isabella. The house was an absolute mess, and the front door was wide open. I started looking for her all over the house, and all I noticed was stuff lying on the floor, and my house was a huge mess. My 2 TVs were gone, my gun and a ton of money were also missing, even some of my expensive clothes. In total, her and whoever she probably went with her took over $10,000 worth of stuff. I felt like a complete idiot for letting this happen. I tried to message her on Tinder, but she had blocked me. I tried to call her and message her phone, but she had blocked me there too. The realization of what had just happened to me hit me like a truck, and I was so angry and feeling hopeless. I filed a report with the police, but surely, Isabella gave me a fake name because we couldn't find her on social media or her last name. If it really was her, the only thing we had as a lead was her appearance and the address where she supposedly lived. When the police knocked on their door, they were greeted by a young boy who said Isabella didn't live there, so they couldn't really do anything without a search warrant, and that was the end of that. Ever since then, I've been beating myself up, and I've sworn to never touch a dating app again. They tell me I'm a weirdo, and no, it's not because I'm a stalker. I'm not a murderer or a rapist, or any of the other exaggerated stuff people try to throw at me. My flaw is I like to send pictures of myself. Call me a compulsive sexter, and yes, that includes unsolicited photos. Okay, maybe it's not the classiest thing in the world, but it's not like I stalk girls online with insults or criticizing me. Only a moron would disagree with that. But still, women can get attention and compliments so fucking easily. Half of those profile pictures are but selfies or of them showing off their big boobs, and as expected, they get millions of likes. So what's wrong with me posting a picture of my big bulge? Why does that make me a weirdo or a moron? Even when I dare and send them unprompted, I still get a girl's attention. If she's in the mood, I'm an attractive guy. I have a big one. They tell me I have a nice baseball player's ass too. I don't see why taking pictures of my butt or myself makes me so different from the Instagram models or all the single girls with provocative pictures on their dating profiles. It's the same motivation. I seek attention. I collect compliments just like them. This Friday night was no different for me. I was home alone in the middle of nowhere, isolated and surrounded by woods as neighbors. I was a college kid with no friends, not to mention no girlfriend either. My parents' house was big and fancy, but living out here in the country could be lonely, especially when I knew all my buddies were out partying and having a blast. All I had at the time was a marathon of TCM black and white horror movies to entertain me, a 12-pack of cheap beer to keep me company, and my favorite apps to give me solace. Meet Me, Tinder, Snap, and Kick, all looking for sexy talk, looking for compliments. It had been a good night so far. I talked to a few girls and showed them my body. "Oh, you're so cute, Patrick. You're so big, Patrick. God, that's a nice ass. Oh, God." Yeah, I was doing well, and my night had just gotten better. I had just matched with a gorgeous 21-year-old girl, Natasha. She had an exotic look, and her style was creative. In all of her photos, she was wearing psychedelic clothing. Think a hippie version of Paula Patton. And she was really great to talk to. Thanks to Tinder, our conversation escalated pretty quickly. She liked my bulge pics, and we both threw compliments at each other like they were hotcakes. She lived nearby, maybe less than 30 minutes from here. For once, I had matched with someone within a reasonable distance, not to mention she seemed really unique and attractive. I didn't even bother asking for her Snapchat. Natasha was so cool. She gave me her number. My joy grew as I drank my fourth beer like it was a Victoria's cigarette. We started texting, and the magic continued. Natasha was a literature major just like me, and we both loved horror movies. We were even watching TCM's House on Haunted Hill, the William Castle classic. This was love at first text, and from there, things got hot. Natasha started with a topless selfie in the bathroom. It's safe to say I lost interest in House on Haunted Hill instantly. Natasha was beautiful, and her boobs were glorious, big and voluptuous, just like she told me she was. I noticed in the pic her bathroom door was open, so maybe I was home alone. How lucky could I be tonight? Natasha wanted another pic of me, so I agreed. The only problem was having to choose from my gallery of naked selfies. Sounds self-centered, I know, but I liked showing off. Plus, I was catering to the female gaze. It's not like I was pressuring Natasha to send me one. At least I had the buttocks and the big one that were worth showing off. Anyway, I chose one of my favorites. Me smiling with my big in the bathroom mirror. Natasha loved it. She replied faster than a cheap scare from William Castle. "God, you are so big, music to my ears." I was ready to take another sip of my beer when a loud screeching noise startled me, causing me to spill some beer. Annoyed, I looked over at the TV. William Castle had scared me again with another damn cheap scare. I muted the TV, ready to focus on my new exciting moment instead of the classic 50s. Another picture message from Natasha arrived. I smiled in excitement as the picture showed Natasha squeezing those big breasts together in the bathroom. She had a seductive look on her face. Even when she tried to be sexual, she still had a playful innocence. I hoped maybe that's what she thought of me when she smiled with my outside. She texted me, "Can I come over to your house?" Mixed thoughts ran through my mind. Of course, I was horny, and I hadn't had sex since I was 19, and yes, none of my few conquests were around. Natasha's height, none were as attractive or as cool. In that case, I'm not even sure any of them were even looking for a degree, much less one in letters. But on the other hand, Natasha could have been some older guy posing as a girl to get pics of young dicks. Or maybe some old creep, or hell, even a scam artist who would come here in the middle of the night to force me to take nudes for her. But Natasha's boobs were so big, and she was hot, and I was alone, and William Castle nor Vincent Price weren't going to do anything to satisfy my sexual desires. So I gave in. 1414 Winston Road, I wrote her back. Also added, "Are you sure you're not too far? Can you get over here?" I got a quick reply. "Yes, I'm like 5 minutes away. I thought you were on Amicus." I replied to her quick reply, "No, my grandmother lives in Stanwick." I'm here for the weekend. I thought, at this rate, I should buy lottery tickets soon. Another picture arrived without even asking. Queen Natasha sent me another nude, this time of her in her bra and panties. Here was this gorgeous girl posing in her bathroom for me. I looked at the beautiful picture, delighted. She sent me a message. Do you like her? Before I could reply, I noticed something in the corner of the photo, and at that moment, my moment of glory faded. Instead of triumph, I felt immense fear. Someone with a laptop was standing just outside of Natasha's bathroom. The glow of the screen illuminated their balaclava, dark clothing, and black gloves. Their expressionless eyes stared at Natasha, but most of all, the laptop they were holding reflected a gleaming butcher knife they were holding, and Natasha seemed to have no idea that someone was standing just a few feet away from her. Panicked, not knowing what to do, I took another swig of beer, as if that was going to calm me down or make me think more clearly. Didn't. My eyes stayed on the terrifying image. The dark balaclava, the piercing eyes, the sharp blade. I stared at her for what seemed like an eternity. I guess I was waiting for Natasha to send me another text or, hell, another picture in that bathroom, this time without whoever was there lurking in her hallway. I downed the beer, threw can number C on the coffee table, armed with alcoholic bravery, and called Natasha. I hated phone calls. Why do you think he always texts and sexts? ABA? But I knew this was different. Natasha needed help. The phone rang and rang nervously. Sweat was running down my face. Come on, Natasha. Ominous murmurs echoed through my mind as if my head was like a vast cave. And then her voicemail welcomed me. At least Natasha had a nice voice. I hung up, restless and disturbed, and threw the phone on the coffee table right next to the empty can. At that point, I felt helpless. I barely knew Natasha, and out of my urge to sext, I probably never talked to her, but I cared. I was worried as hell. My nerves made me pull out another can of cheap beer. I think I drank it in seconds. It was supposed to help me calm down, but it didn't. The skeletons and scares of William Castle didn't help either. I crushed the empty can and dropped it on the coffee table. My phone then broke the silence with a cold vibration. The unpleasant sound of it sliding across the table scared the shit out of me. I grabbed my cell phone. A new text from Natasha was waiting for me. It was a dubious picture message. I debated opening it. What if all this was some kind of message, kind of sick joke, and Natasha was sending me a virus or a link to one of those porn sites, Amadier? The sad thing is that I was actually hoping it was that. My big crush was just a spam bot, not an unsuspecting target. But I needed to know for sure. I swiped my finger across the screen of my phone, horrified. Natasha was in the picture, only this time I hadn't taken it herself. Instead, she was posing in her sexiest pose. Her murdered body had been placed in the bathtub, still wearing her bra and panties. Her chest gouged out by a sharp blade. Pieces of her organs hung like ornaments on a tree. The once empty bathtub was almost filled with red, a veritable bloodbath. From her body, judging by the marks and cuts on her hands, she had fought, but in her vulnerable state, she didn't stand a chance. No one would have. Her big eyes stayed with me. Her cute smile was gone, but her eyes that had captivated me all night were clearly visible and stared straight at me. I forced myself to look at the disturbing image once again. I was devastated, but I couldn't help but notice how the killer had positioned Natasha in an almost artistic way. It was an almost aesthetic pose. He even lit her in the room. She looked different, like if this damn sick man had prepared all just for the picture, just for her audience, just for me. God, I said, horrified. Tears were rolling down my face as I went back to the home screen. I'd never met Natasha in person, but the anguish was ravaging me. She looked like she was in so much pain. God, it must have been horrible. I hoped it was all just some sick joke, but I knew that was just wishful thinking. I looked over at the TV. Somehow, the cheap entertainment of William Castle was comforting. The fake murders, the plastic skeleton, and elaborate mansion set were a welcome distraction from the all-too-real violence I held in my hands. Like an electric shock, my phone vibrated with another notification. A fresh, cold wave of terror washed over me. I looked at the screen. It was another text from Natasha. I opened it to see the text. "Hey handsome, what the hell?" I thought. Then another text appeared. "Do you recognize your little bitch now?" Horror washed over me. The killer was fucking texting. Shaking, I began to reply. A third text hit my terrified eyes. "She's quite the screamer." I sent her a reply. "Who the hell are you?" And then I thought, what the hell was I doing? The courage of drunk had really gotten to me. I wasn't calling the police or my parents. I was texting a killer, angry at myself. I did what I thought any drunk, terrified mind would do. I opened another beer. My phone vibrated with a new notification, dreading the next message or picture. I looked at the screen, but it was neither. Instead, the killer had emphasized one of the messages I sent to Natasha. An exclamation mark highlighted my home address. 1414 Winston Road. My heart sank as the cheap beer slipped through my fingers. The can crashed to the floor, and the beer soaked my socks, but I didn't feel it. I only felt fear, an immense horror. Another message was emphasized. The one Natasha said was only 10 minutes away. The exclamation mark made me realize her killer was less than 10 minutes away. Holding the phone, I ran out of the room. I pulled a large knife out of my parents' wooden knife block. I gripped the gun tightly as I stared out the kitchen window. It was hard to see anything in such low light. My mom had been scolding my dad for the poor security lights these past few years, and now I would scold him too. Couldn't see a thing. I walked back into the living room. My phone shook with an aggressive vibration, making me recoil in fright. I yelled out. Another text from Natasha's number waited. My sight opened it up. It was a video message, and judging by the thumbnail, I could see where it was taken. My front yard. Uneasy, I cast a quick glance out the window, but that was no use. I couldn't see one outside. "Thanks, Dad." I faced my phone and played the video. It was creepier than I expected. The 10-second clip showed me looking out the kitchen window. In it, he was holding the knife like he was actually going to do something. God, I looked stupid. More terror hit me. Who recorded this? Was in my yard, and I wasn't scared? The killer was just taunting me with this, playing with me like an NBA player with a 4-year-old at summer camp. I bet this son of a bitch was laughing right now. With all the drunk courage I had left, I texted the killer again. "Leave me alone, imbecile. I'm gonna call the police." Right before I threw another glance at the window, my phone vibrated. The killer had answered in all caps. Too late. With impulsive fingers, I dialed 911 and brought the phone to my ear. I told the operator everything, no matter how fucking crazy and insane it sounded. I begged her, please send someone to 1414 Winston Road. Whatever I told her, all while I held the knife while waiting on the line, just in case. I kept looking out the window until I saw the red and blue lights flashing outside. Luckily, 2 patrol cars had arrived. 2 cops came into my house. One was nice and quiet. The other was skinny and bitter. He was like Barney 5 version 2.0. I could tell Officer 5 had taken one look at me, one at the beer, and one at the empty pizza box before forming an opinion. But that didn't stop me from presenting my case. I told them all about Natasha, showed them the pictures, the video. I made Barney 5 believe me, or at least that he believed me enough to take my story seriously. Barney kept complaining, but he knew his partner wasn't a jerk. The calm policeman believed me and convinced Barney to come check out Natasha's place. I was relieved when the good cop even offered to watch my house until the morning. After all the ruckus had finally died down, I finally felt safe. I had cops checking on Natasha. I had a patrol car parked right outside, and I had my parents coming back in the morning. Believe me when I told Mom and Dad everything. They were freaking out, and for once, I was glad I had such neurotic parents. Anyways, I finally felt like I could just sit down and go back to the classic movie marathon. Anything to take my mind off what happened to Natasha. At least Carnival of Souls was on TV by then. I'd had a few more beers. I looked outside and saw the good cop still parked in my driveway. Hell, I felt so safe. I even threw the knife on the coffee table. I finished beer number 8, and then a bunch of drunken thoughts ran through my mind. And yeah, maybe the thought of going back on those chat apps crossed my mind. After all, it would be a distraction, temporary relief from the pain I felt for Natasha. But then I realized that she deserved better. That's what I mean, and if she was the one, and here I was still alive and drinking cheap beer, then I thought, after all this, what happened to her killer? Could it have been a joke? Natasha was alive. Hell, was she even real? I hesitantly looked at my phone. There was still no word from Barney 5 or the other officers, but I needed to know more. I needed to know Natasha was okay. I muted the TV and stared at Natasha's number on my phone screen. I called her, the damn number, partly out of morbid curiosity and partly out of a lingering fear that I had no closure on this, after all. I wanted to catch that son of a bitch. I wanted to avenge Natasha's death. As the call came online, I waited with intense anxiety for the killer to answer. What would they sound like? What would they say? I felt more sweat rolling down my brow. The anticipation was killing me. It was an anticipation fueled by fear. The first few rings only made me nervous, thinking hard what I was going to say. Hey, sick of turning yourself in to the police, Jesus. This drunken courage was more like drunken stupidity. But before I hung up, I heard music. Surprised, I put down the phone while I looked around the room. The music was annoyingly popular, a catchy chorus. What the hell was that? Nelly Furtado. I paid attention and realized that, yes, I'm like a bird, in all her ridiculous glory. I looked down at my phone. The call was still ringing. Nelly was still singing. The connection hit me like a punch to the stomach. The unease overwhelmed me, but I forced myself to keep going, like the world's most arrogant amateur detective. Maybe it was the alcohol talking. I followed the tune of Nelly Furtado down my long, dark hallway. The music was louder now. Natasha's call was still ringing, and her ringtone kept playing. Tracing the song, I followed her to my basement door. I deliberated on what to do. The ringtones tormented me. I'm like a bird, taunted me, and Natasha was chasing me under all that weight. My head began to spin. I was getting the better of her. I decided to just do it. I opened the door and ran downstairs. My drunken courage had returned, or maybe I was just fed up and ready to face whatever or whoever was in the house with me. The basement should have been completely dark, but it wasn't. There was a faint glow that was coming from the farthest part, and the song was overwhelming. It was like I had interrupted Nelly and Furtado in the studio. I'm like a bird. It was sounding so fucking loud at this point. The ultra-catchy chorus was booming through the room. I ran down the stairs at full speed, my focused mind taking me closer and closer to the back of the basement, right towards where the light and Nelly were coming from. As I got closer, I heard muffled voices. They sounded young and annoying, like teenagers planning a prank and then having second thoughts about doing it. Who the hell were they? I wondered. Were there multiple killers? Was this all just some kind of sick joke? Maybe the one or two people I had talked to in college were really throwing me a surprise party. Maybe it was all the girls and guys I had joked around with before. Who the hell knows? I felt a cold breeze. One of the nearby windows was wide open, but I still continued. I forced myself to keep going. Fight or go, Patrick. Yeah, definitely the alcohol talking. And then I reached my destination, amongst the mess of storage stuff. My dad's maniac had kept here for decades. I saw a laptop lit up on a table. I recognized it instantly. It was the killer's. Nelly Furtado's laptop. The song kept playing right next to it. It was nothing more than a ringtone from a large iPhone. I staggered over in a grim mood. I knew it had to be waterproof as it was completely soaked in blood. Hell, he had even saved me as a contact. There was my name, Patrick, and my Tinder profile picture as a contact picture. He really liked me? I hung up the phone, despondent and disturbed. No more Nelly Furtado. Look at that idiot, I heard a teenage voice squeal. Yeah, that idiot looks sad, added another asshole. The voices forced my gaze to the laptop now. I saw a piece of paper taped over the laptop screen, big crude letters like the killer's text messages in all caps. It spelled out a cruel note to me. Here's more attention, star. The killer had even drawn a winking smiley face. It was a crude illustration, like a disturbed adult would draw, trying to mimic the wild creativity of a child. With unlike the letters, I noticed that the winking face was drawn in dark red ink, with Natasha's blood. Disgusted, I ripped the damn paper off the screen. Then I saw a multitude of windows open on the laptop. They looked like they were screenshots of video calling sites like Skype or something similar. A multitude of faces stared at me. Old, young, men, women. The many faces formed a captivated audience. "They're watching us," a smiling brat commented. The boy's voice sounded like he hadn't changed yet. Instead of playing World of Warcraft, apparently what this site was his escape from the bullies. "Tell her something," a bald guy yelled at her. I could feel the collective gazes of all of them on me. They were a multitude of intrigued faces, uneasily. I took a step back. This wasn't the place for Gab Brothers Gone Wild or Lady Boners. This was the Reddit or any other arena where I used to show off my stuff for all the world to see. This wasn't the kind of audience I was used to. They didn't seem hungry for carnal lust. They seemed hungry for blood. "Oh, I think so, I see it," the high-pitched brat announced, his voice reaching the annoying levels of a high-pitched alarm. My eyes went to the top left corner of the screen, and there I saw a small window showing me a dark basement. A live stream that I couldn't hide from. "This is gonna be good," said another teenager. "Better be, I paid good money for this," the bald guy complained at the bottom of the screen. I noticed a chat box overflowing with comments. Catch them? Boobs will split open. It still looked good, and then I saw the name of the site I was on. It wasn't Skype. It wasn't Omegle. It was Live Kills, live stream of murders. See all the blood all the time. The address didn't even sound familiar to me. or.com.ni.org. This was the deep web, the one all those creepy posts warned about, but no one really believed. "Oh, there he comes," the same brat shrieked, his voice reaching the irritating volume of a siren. I looked again at the live feed of myself. Even in the small window, I could make out the terrifying balaclava-clad figure emerging from the shadows of the basement. The reflection of his long butcher knife gleamed on the laptop screen. I heard the crowd, ooh, and excitement from every window. They were ready for the show to update them. Luckily, the show was short. I managed to dodge the first blow from the bastard in the balaclava before he crashed into the laptop, knocking all his equipment to the ground. Now that I think about it, I'm not even sure if the killer was a man. Could have been a woman I played with for all I know, and honestly, or maybe hopefully, I'll probably never know. I ran crying like a coward to the good cop, but the killer was already gone by the time we got back to the basement. Instead, all that was left was their note. "Here's more attention, star." The police took her away, but I haven't heard anything else from them, and although the note hasn't stopped me from still sexting from time to time, their words and that horrendous handwriting have stuck with me. What lonely, desperate person in their 30s could resist a tagline like that? I tried Tinder, Bumble, Plenty of Fish, and Match.com, just to name a few, and I hadn't gotten anything that lasted more than a few dinner dates. Then I found Gachu, a dating app that claimed to be different. 99% of users never left the app again. Dating app, and it was completely free. I checked out the app info, and it was no joke. There were no in-app purchases or hidden sign-up fees, and it had hundreds of positive 4 or 5-star reviews. Except one. 1-star review said this app is not what it says it is, and that was it, with no explanation as to why it shouldn't be downloaded or why it was misleading. Nothing but trolls, I thought. I hit the cloud icon and waited for what felt like the 100th time. I set up a profile with the same old pictures and the same clever one-liner. I didn't feel those butterflies anymore that I used to get when I thought these things could actually work. I did the stupid identity verification and connected my social media profile, but then things got different. The app asked me to bring my eye up to the front-facing camera. It didn't say why, but I assumed it was some sort of safety feature. I was impressed. If these were the steps they took to eliminate the possibility of bots or fake profiles, then I was definitely on board. Usually, the next step on these dating apps is to look through profiles for potential matches. But with Gachu, the app simply began a process of finding a match perfectly suited to me in every way. I was skeptical, but within moments, I was stunned to see the result. It was a picture of a girl named Gala, age 27, who was less than 2.5 miles away from me. She was perfect, I mean completely perfect for me, a biracial girl, objectively beautiful, but with that peculiar hairstyle and piercings that I have always found irresistible. Plus, She was lovely, polite, and seemed genuinely interested in me. The key word is seemed. The next day, she didn't reply to any of my messages. A few days later, even though I was already pretty seasoned from my previous experiences with dating apps, I checked Gachu just in case Gala had been busy or I hadn't received notifications. I felt pretty rejected, seeing that she had been active on the app but still hadn't bothered to reply to me. She had posted a new picture of herself, and I'm ashamed to admit I couldn't resist looking at her. But she didn't look like the same cheerful, smiling girl I had seen a few days ago. She looked tired, worn out, as if she hadn't been eating or sleeping well. I thought maybe that was why she hadn't been responding to me. I wouldn't be too excited about flirting with strangers from the internet either if I had gotten sick. But the next day, she posted another picture. She looked even worse. Her skin looked dry and flaky, and her eyes that used to be a deep golden brown now looked dull and milky. She looked like she was dying. I quickly wrote a message asking her if everything was okay and suggesting that maybe she should go to the doctor if she felt so bad. The reply came right away. She wanted to meet me. I replied that she was free for the afternoon, but she insisted that we meet at night. I asked her where and when, but she didn't reply. I didn't get a reply for hours until finally, a message came through. I'm outside. I never told her where I lived, but here she was. I know because I looked outside my building. A very sick and hungry-looking girl is standing on the sidewalk in front of my building, looking right up at the windows of my apartment. People walk past her, but it's like they don't see her, like no one else can see her except me. I'm going downstairs now to see what she wants, or else... Well, I have no idea what's going to happen, but I have no doubt that Gachu will be the last dating app one use. After my marriage ended, I found myself in a tough situation financially. I was working part-time as a waitress, and I had an apartment I couldn't afford. It was nothing fancy or anything, but I still didn't make enough to cover the rent. Around that time, I started using Tinder to meet new people. I had used it before. In fact, that's how I met my first husband. One night, I was at home swiping on the app, and no one was really catching my attention. Maybe I was being too picky, or maybe I wasn't over my ex yet. After a while, an interesting profile popped up. His name was Jose, and he was actually a few years younger than me. I'm usually into older men, not that much older, but I'd never dated anyone younger before. I swiped through each of his photos multiple times. One was on a white sand beach. Another was in New York City, and in yet another, he looked like he was in front of a private jet. I know I sound shallow, but that's what initially made him stand out. It was the only reason I was interested. It was just what made him stand out in the beginning. Swipe Jose, that was the only like I gave up to that point. Then I put my phone away and went to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I opened my phone and saw that I had a match on Tinder. I knew it was Jose because he was the only one that had accepted. I opened my messages and saw that he had already texted me. Everything he said was that it's something that really bothers him if you're going to contact him, at least try to say a little more. However, this time I let it go, and we started talking. After no more than 5 or 10 messages back and forth, Jose asked me out. I accepted, and we made plans for the following Friday night. We went out to a really nice restaurant, much fancier than I would have suggested. He was a somewhat awkward guy. I can't say exactly why. We had a decent conversation, but there were more awkward silences than I'm used to. However, it was a first date, and first dates can be awkward. When the bill came, I was a little nervous that Jose would want to split the cost of the night. I didn't know how much it would be, but I knew I couldn't pay for it. So, I was relieved when Jose took the bill without hesitation. After that, we said goodbye, and I took the bus back home. Jose and I hung out a few more times in the following weeks. As before, we always had a pretty good time. However, there was something off about him. It was like he was trying too hard to impress me. It was clear he had money and he wasn't afraid to spend it on me. Things were getting more and more extravagant. One weekend, he took me on a river cruise that must have cost at least a few $1,000s in total. All of that for a woman who wasn't even his girlfriend yet. I don't want to sound ungrateful, but it seemed like a red flag. Things came to a head when Jose sent me a text inviting me on a trip to Mexico. Although it was tempting, I wasn't ready to take that step. I felt bad, but I broke up with him via text. After that, my phone rang. It was Jose. I answered, and he immediately bombarded me with the most vile and hateful insults I had ever heard. I was furious. I had never seen that side of him before. While we were dating, Jose had always been a very polite and shy guy. I held the phone to my ear for a minute or two, and he wouldn't stop yelling. So, I finally hung up and turned the phone off. I was scared. I didn't know what this guy was capable of. Plus, I knew where he lived, as he had left me at my apartment once or twice before. The next morning, I turned the phone on, and I had dozens of missed calls and a ton of texts from Jose. I don't remember exactly the content of the texts, but they were full of the same insults as before. I didn't answer for the next few days, but I finally decided to call him to try to sort things out. He answered and started yelling at me like before. I tried to calm him down for a minute, but it was no use. He even said that I had to reimburse him for all the dates we had gone on. I wasn't in a financial position to do that, so I hung up again. That night, I went to work. I was working nights as a waitress at the time, and all night I had Jose on my mind. I was worried that he would come for me to pay him or something worse. I finished my shift around 1 a.m. and took the bus home. When I got to the door of my apartment, I was shocked, and I was scared to death. My heart sank. The door was fully open. I took a cautious step inside, and as soon as I did, I knew someone had been there. My mind went straight to Jose. I yelled, "Hello?" but there was no answer. I walked around the place as fear ran through my body. When I got to my bedroom, I noticed something on my bed. It was a piece of paper. I picked it up and turned it over. There was a message written on it that said, "You are dead." That was enough. I ran out of there and never came back. I went to a friend's house that night and called the police. They were able to arrest Jose with my testimony and with the evidence they were able to gather from my apartment. After questioning Jose, they found out that he was completely broke and had been paying for our dates with money borrowed from various credit cards. That really confused me for a while, but when I saw a documentary on Netflix, it started to make sense. In the documentary, a guy would use Tinder to impress women with expensive gifts and dates. Then he would trick them into lending him money, promising that he would pay them back. But he never did. My relationship with Jose never went that far, but I suspect it was going in that direction. That would explain why I wanted that I would pay him back. After that, I never heard from him again, and now I'm more careful about who I meet online. This reminds me of an old saying my grandfather used to say, "If something seems too good to be true, it probably is." I worked at a small ice cream shop in my early 20s, and that's where I met one of my best friends, Michaela. She was a year younger than me, and I was like an older sister to her. We would always try to get our shifts together, which were usually at night since the more senior employees would take the day shifts. The place would have busy periods during the night, usually when the movies ended. There was a big movie theater nearby, and that was our main source of customers. We would use that time to gossip and talk about our personal lives. I had a steady boyfriend at the time, and we had been together since high school, so I had no experience with dating apps. Michaela, on the other hand, was on several apps. She was around 5 feet 7 inches, had short blonde hair, and was slightly stocky. She used Tinder the most of the time and used to show me her matches and the cheesy messages she was sending. We were standing behind the counter at the store, looking at her phone and laughing when she showed me one of her new matches and the conversation they had started. His name was Alan, and he was 27 years old. Alan had black hair that was kind of long, a short beard, and glasses. He was actually very attractive, almost like a model. My first impression was that he might be fake, but I didn't want to put her off, so I stayed quiet. Michaela then told me that they were planning on going out on their first date the next night. I wished her luck. She put her phone away, and we finished our shift. That night, I called her the next night around 11 to see how her date went. She didn't answer, which I took as a good sign, and then I went to sleep. Michaela and I had a shift together the next night, and I was excited to see how her date went. I got to work, but Michaela was nowhere to be found. It wasn't like her to be late, so I called her, but she didn't answer. She didn't have her parents' number, so I really didn't know what to do. I waited in the store for about half an hour, and finally, I couldn't stand it any longer and called the police. When I spoke to the officer, I found out that Michaela's mother had reported her missing the night before. She never came back from her date. Several weeks went by, and no one heard from Michaela. I continued working at the ice cream shop, but it was incredibly difficult without her. I was in close contact with her mother and was frustrated with the police, who hadn't made any headway on the case. Over 2 weeks had gone by, and there had been no arrests, so I was feeling frustrated. Another week went by, and still no news on Michaela. By then, I was more than frustrated. I had to do something, so I came up with a plan. I created a profile on Tinder and uploaded some of my prettiest pictures. I remembered the face of the guy Michaela had gone out with that night. I had no idea if the pictures I saw were real, but I had to try. I opened the app and started swiping. I rejected every profile, only caring about finding the guy Michaela went out with that night. It took about an hour, but I finally found someone that looked like the guy. His name was Faust. Although I'm pretty sure he said Alan before, I looked at his profile for a minute and then swiped right. Later that day, I opened the app and saw I had a message from him. I felt a mix of disgust and excitement. This could be the key to finding out what happened to my friend. I replied to his message, and I'm ashamed to say what I wrote was pretty provocative. I needed this guy to be interested. After a few more messages, Fausto asked me out, and I enthusiastically accepted. The next night, we met for drinks at a little bar on the other side of town. I had a hard time holding back my tears when I saw him sitting at a table in a dark corner of the place. He looked just like his pictures, which, to be honest, surprised me. I sat down and put on my best forced smile, even though it almost made me throw up from my nerves. We talked for about an hour. I didn't mention Michaela, even though it was a well-known topic in the area. As I looked at him, I wondered what he really knew. He gave me the creeps, and I highly suspected he had something to do with what happened to Michaela. I was thinking about what my next step would be. The plan was simply to get in touch with the guy, and to be honest, I didn't expect it to work. Now that I was there, I didn't really know what to do. I kept talking to Fausto until he finally invited me to come to his house. I politely declined and then quickly excused myself. I got up and got out of there as fast as I could. When I got to the street, I dialed 911. I managed to get through to the detective in charge of Michaela's case and explained to him what had happened. I told him what I did and told him that I thought that guy was responsible for Michaela's disappearance. Much to my relief, the officer believed me and took it seriously. I gave them Fausto's information, and they promised to look into it. A week later, I heard that Fausto had been arrested and confessed to accidentally killing Michaela. He even led them to her body. There is some closure in knowing the truth, but it's still hard. I'm a 36-year-old male, and this happened to me when I was 30. I've never had much success with women, probably because I'm very shy and introverted. When I was younger, I tried to go out with friends, but I always felt very uncomfortable in the middle of crowds. Nightclubs are practically the last place I would want to be because of that. I have always found it really hard to meet women. I'm not bad looking. I'm tall and reasonably fit. Given that everyone pretty much judges others by their pictures, I felt like I had an advantage. I prefer to be judged by my looks rather than my awkward personality. I was using a dating app called OkCupid and was talking to a very beautiful woman named Shelley. She honestly looked like a fashion model or something. I could hardly believe she was interested in me. We talked every night for over 2 weeks before she finally asked me to meet in person. I suggested we meet for dinner at a restaurant, but she invited me over to her house. That alone should have been a huge red flag, but I agreed anyway. When the time came, I took the bus to the address Shelley gave me, and when I got there, it was an old house that was in desperate need of maintenance. It wasn't exactly the kind of place I was expecting for a woman like her. I thought it would be a luxury penthouse or something. The place was single-story with a 2-car garage. It had blue vinyl siding, clear with several missing panels. The roof was brown shingles, and they were all lifted, showing they needed to be replaced. There were no lights in the house, so I wasn't sure if I was in the right place. I texted Shelly to make sure it was really her house. She replied right away and told me to go in through the garage. I looked into the garage, and the large door was slightly open at the bottom. There was a gap of about a meter, just enough for me to fit through without having to get on my knees. I was nervous but very excited to meet this girl, so I walked up the driveway towards the open garage door. I stood in front of it, bent down, and looked inside. There was a dim light in the far corner of the garage. I also noticed there was no car. I crouched down, walked through the gap, and stood up to look around. I saw a masked man standing on the other side of the garage, and he was holding a knife. As soon as we locked eyes, the door started to slide down, and the man ran towards me. I dropped to the ground and rolled back out of the garage, going under the automatic door by a few inches. I jumped up and ran out of there. A few blocks down, there was a Dunkin' Donuts that was pretty busy. When I saw the store packed with people, I knew I was safe. Once I had a chance to catch my breath, I decided not to go to the police. To be honest, I was so embarrassed that I had fallen into that trap. I was embarrassed that I was using online dating to begin with. I know it was the wrong decision, but that's what I did. A year later, I was watching the news, and I heard that someone else had a similar experience to mine. Only this one didn't end so well. Now I know that that night, I could have saved someone's life if I had reported it, but I didn't, and that weighs heavily on my conscience to this day. My name is Abigail, and I'm 21 years old. This happened to me when I was 19. I dated a guy I met on Tinder named Claudio. He seemed as nice as anyone through a few texts and a few calls. It was a mistake not to ask him to FaceTime to make sure it wasn't a catfish or something like that. They can make fun of me all you want in the comments. That's why I've never been through anything like this or been a victim of a catfish. So, I didn't think it was that common. Claudio asked me if I wanted to stop by his house on a Friday night after I got off work. We'd been talking for a few days, so I wasn't opposed. The only thing was, I wasn't just looking for a casual hookup. I'm sure some of you girls know exactly what it's like. It can be hard to tell if a guy has ulterior motives. Let's be realistic. If we're being honest, 90% of guys just want to sleep with you, even if they're nice and good people. You gotta be realistic, that's the world we live in, and I totally get that. But I was hoping for someone who wanted to get to know me a little bit first, and maybe if things progressed, we could start talking about it or even start a relationship. I wasn't necessarily looking for that. Basically, I was just hoping he wouldn't be a weirdo, and that we could have a good time. The pictures of him on Tinder were as typical as they come. A guy with an all-American country look, with pictures of him fishing. Not that it matters that much, but we both connected over our faith in God, and that made me feel a lot more comfortable, knowing that we had something in common. Now I realized that he was just using that as an excuse for me to let my guard down. It had to be that way. It was about a 20-minute drive for me, which was fine. I got there around 10:30. He lived in a quiet neighborhood that looked pretty new, since there weren't many houses on the streets that looked inhabited. I parked on the side of the street and looked at the house one more time. Only the porch light was on and nothing else. None of my family or friends knew where I was at the moment, so I decided to send a quick text to my sister, telling her I was on a Tinder date and also sent her the address, just in case something went wrong. I swallowed the nervousness I was feeling as I walked up to the porch. I sent him a quick text saying that I had arrived, and just as I was sending it, I knocked on the door and waited. A second passed, but no one answered. I knocked again and waited. Again, no one answered. Now I had a bad feeling, so I went back to my car, thinking I should leave. Suddenly, I got a message on Tinder from Claudio, telling me that I was stupid for knocking on the wrong door, and that he could see me that I was only 2 houses away. The address he sent me led to the wrong house. You know how sometimes Google Maps can fail. I checked the address of the house I was at, and sure enough, it was different than the number he had given me. I walked towards the house he pointed out to me, with a green Pontiac parked in front. I noticed that the porch light was on, as well as the one in the living room. About when I was 70 yards down the road, the interior light went out. I stopped at the end of the driveway, thinking for a moment and looking around at my surroundings. If something went horribly wrong, there wouldn't be many options to get help. Suddenly, before anything else could happen, I received another message on Tinder from Claudio, asking me, "Are you coming?" with a laughing emoji. I thought it was weird. It was definitely not something normal, but I kept walking. Finally, I noticed that the front door was open, although the glass door was closed, and it was too dark to see inside. Just when I was about to turn around, I got one last text from him, saying the door was unlocked. At that point, I just knew something was wrong, so I started walking back to my car. Just as I was opening the car door, I heard a girl's voice, probably around my age, coming from the house. I looked back, and the door was open, and she was leaning out. She asked me if I was coming in, and she also had a beer drink in her hand. I looked at her and told her, "Okay," and walked back. Claudio had originally told me he was home alone, and the warning signs kept going off in my head. So I decided enough was enough. I got in the car and drove off. On my way home, I opened Tinder and saw that Claudio had blocked me. He didn't give me any explanation, absolutely nothing. For me, that gave me all the information I needed, showing me that something was definitely wrong and that I wasn't exaggerating anything. You don't think a normal person would just come out to say hi to you. Maybe it wasn't a catfish, but all my friends in the area told me they've never seen it before. I feel like there was something sinister behind the surface, regardless of whether it was exaggerating or not. If there are red flags and I have a bad feeling, it's really not worth the risk. A few days later, I got a text asking if I wanted to try to see each other again. Claudio said he was sorry about last time. Absolutely not. My friend Angela suggested I look up his number on the internet to see what information I could get. And this is what we found. It said the owner of the phone was 28, and his name was Jose. That's really suspicious and makes me think they were definitely catfishing me. That explains why he couldn't meet me at the door. I don't know what they had planned for me, but at least I didn't have to find out the hard way. Maybe I wouldn't think so badly if there wasn't a girl trying to lure me in with alcohol. That was the last straw for me. I never thought I'd be the type of girl who would meet up with a guy she met on Tinder. But there I was, outside this suspicious-looking house, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. His pictures made him look super handsome, and we had been texting for a couple of weeks, so I felt like I knew a little bit about him. When I arrived, I noticed there was a party going on. I wasn't really supposed to be on Tinder at 16, but I lied about my age. All my friends were there too, so I figured I'd be okay. However, when I walked in, my excitement quickly turned to awkwardness. Someone asked me who I was, and I told her my name was Kyla. That's when Julieta, the guy I was talking to, approached me with 2 beers and greeted me, then insisted I drink one. Julieta looked very different and older in person than she looked in pictures, which immediately made me question a lot of things. I declined the beer. At the party, most of the people there were older men. I'd say the average age was about 24. I suddenly felt like I had made a huge mistake. They were playing beer pong and acting crazy. Nothing like what I expected when I walked in. I tried to leave, but Julieta and some of her friends pressured me to stay longer. I didn't know what to do and was starting to feel really scared. Then I noticed another girl my age who looked just as uncomfortable as me. It was like both of us knew we were in a dangerous situation. She seemed to have already been through some bad stuff. I walked over to talk to her, and she told me that she had wanted to leave from the second she got there and that she thought she was just going to meet some guy. We both thought we were coming to meet Julieta, and he wasn't even paying us any attention, which was probably a good thing. We tried to get out of there quietly at one point, but we were just waiting for the right time to leave without being noticed. We didn't know each other, but we stuck together, hoping that the togetherness would give us some strength. That was when things got really dark. 2 of the older men started acting really aggressive and tried to physically take us into a room and force us to drink. It became apparent that we were both in danger, and the only option was to run away. Luckily, at one point, Juliet got those guys to leave us alone. The guys that were giving us the most trouble came out the back door for some reason, and we took that as a sign to run. We managed to escape and call the police. We were both victims of a trap. We ran back to my car as fast as we could, seeking refuge in a nearby parking lot about 2 kilometers away, where we hugged and thanked God for allowing us to get out of that house without getting hurt. They knew we were underage since we arrived, and they didn't care. They also saw how uncomfortable we were and that we wanted to leave, and they didn't care either. I shudder to think of what could have happened if the other girl and I hadn't trusted our instincts and looked out for each other. Meeting a stranger from Tinder was the biggest mistake of my life, and I will never take that kind of risk again. It was a wake-up call to the dangers that can come with online dating, and I am so thankful that we both made it out of that house. If life has taught me anything, it's that dating is very complicated. As a kid, I thought asking someone out was a complete waste of time. Growing up, my beliefs stayed the same, but by then, I had made friends who had their own partners. Eventually, peer pressure got to me, and I signed up for the first dating site I could find. Now, I can't say if the events that followed occurred because of that particular site or just my terrible luck. To be safe, I'm going to refrain from naming the site in question. During my time on the site, I managed to find what I consider a respectable amount of matches. The dates I went on with these women ranged from the mediocre to the just plain weird. The first example of one of these dates was with a woman we'll call Jennifer. She was about my age, blonde hair, fairly petite, a seemingly normal girl. We talked about our interests for a few days via instant message until we finally agreed to meet at a local coffee shop for lunch. The afternoon started out great. We talked about work, our families, what we would do on the weekends. The only thing that really bothered me was her tendency to check her phone every 5 minutes or so. I asked her if she was expecting a call or something, but she brushed it off like it was nothing and quickly changed the subject. As lunch was about to end, Jennifer sure enough did get a call. She looked at her phone, then immediately looked at me and said that she needed to take the call outside. I nodded and watched as she quickly walked out of the cafeteria, holding her phone to her ear. As she talked on the phone, she paced back and forth, and her expression seemed somewhat nervous. Naturally, I got worried, but I knew better than to butt into other people's personal business, so I waited politely, checking my own phone every now and then. After about 15 minutes, she came back and asked if I could accompany her to a nearby convenience store to run a quick errand. I agreed to accompany her, noticing how she still seemed worried about something. When we got there, she told me to wait outside for her, which was odd because I thought she would want me to stay with her the whole time. However, I ignored it and lit a cigarette while I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30, and so on. What was taking so long? The store was pretty small, so it couldn't be that hard to find what she needed. Despite her instructions, I decided to be a gentleman and go in to help her. However, a split second before I touched the door handle, the inside of the store went completely black. It wasn't like the light from the windows had gone out. The view inside was pure darkness. Nothing could be seen. I raised my hand to open the door and go in, but a bad feeling in my stomach made me hesitate. Looking around, I noticed that no one else seemed to notice this unusual event. People on the street walked by without even looking in the direction of the store. After about 5 minutes, the light inside the store came back on, and the inside looked exactly the same, as if nothing had happened. I couldn't see Jennifer through the window, so I went in to see if she was okay. The other customers I saw seemed normal, although I think I heard one whisper something to another as I walked past. Not finding Jennifer, I asked the cashier if she was okay, if I had seen her come in. "No, but if I see anyone like that, I'll let you know," the cashier replied. I thanked her and headed for the door. However, as I did, I noticed another customer whispering something to his partner. When I looked right at them, they immediately stopped talking and walked away. I was confused enough by Jennifer's sudden disappearance to not pay much attention to it. As I walked out, I've been texting Jennifer since then, but have yet to receive any kind of response. A few days ago, her profile on the website was taken down. I tried calling her, but only got the standard message. "This number is no longer in service." I'm not sure what happened to her, but given how she acted and the circumstances of her disappearance, I don't have much hope.